Welcome everyone to another episode of Let's Talk Special Economic Zones. I'm your host Ainsley Brown, and in today's episode, we are going to cover a very interesting topic of how to make money from knowing that zones are ecosystems of trust. Now, zones, no matter what you want to call them, special economic zones, free trade zones, free zones, enterprise zones, it's the same thing. They have the similar characteristics, and some of them similar characteristics is that it is a separate area or an area within a country that there are separate rules. There may be different fiscal benefits that apply, for example, duty free um, status for goods that go into the zone as long as they remain in the zone. There may be, a reduced corporate income tax rate, um, higher levels of trade facilitation, and on and on. There are just, it's a separate area where, certain incentives are given, whether fiscal, non-fiscal, or even financial, depending on the zone. Now, in terms of how to make money, first you have to acknowledge that uh, zones are ecosystems of trust. And what do I mean by an ecosystem of trust? We all live in societies, and societies are ecosystems of trust. There are things that we you don't really think about, and you take for granted. So, for example, just take traffic. The traffic light goes red. The expectation is that everyone who is on the red light is gonna stop, right? Pedestrians then can cross, and then the other side of the traffic can go. Sometimes that doesn't happen, unfortunately, and then there are accidents and so forth. But for the most part, that is what happens. And we trust that it will happen. We also trust the fact that, the food we consume is safe to consume, right? The pharmaceuticals that we consume, occasionally you'll find something, a salmonella outbreak or some sort of chemical being put in the pharmaceutical that ought not to, but that's the exception, not the rule. And we typically don't even think about it, right? That is a demonstration of an ecosystem of trust being there. And zones are very much ecosystems of trust because, goods come in and out, people come in and out. And there are, procedures that must be followed, and the expectation is that you follow these rules. If you don't, then there's certain punishments that are there. You're bound by legislation that says you must do this or you must do that. You're bound by contract to, whether it be suppliers, or it could be a tenant in a zone having to pay their developer. The developer trusts them to pay on time every month, right? Occasionally that doesn't happen, but there are rules to take care of that. So the ecosystem, in effect, is taking care of that. Now, when I'm not going to, just a fair one, I'm not going to give specific examples because it's going to vary per zone and per zone regime. But I just want to put together some principles or put forward some ideas to say, how do you analyze and see how you, an entrepreneur, can make some money from that ecosystem of trust that's called a zone? Now, you have to look at exactly what the zone regime consists of, right? In order to see where you can supply goods and services to that zone or participate. Good example. Zones typically, one area where zones are, I guess, universal is the duty-free status of equipment and, goods going in as long as they remain in the zone. What that can do is you can do something in the logistics world called postponement. So if you are a non-zone entity, you can basically say, you know what I'm going to do? The zone, whoever is in that zone that can supply me with that service, some 3PL, third party logistics provider or fourth party logistics provider, is going to supply me that service. My goods are going to go in that zone and sit there duty free until I make my next decision. So I'm some sort of manufacturer, and then I, bring in my goods. That 3PL service provider operated in a zone then says, yes, I'm going to give you that service. I'm going to hold on to your good. Of course, they're charging you a fee for that service. And, but as far as I'm concerned, I'm saving money because I'm delaying the payment of those duties until the time I need them. So that affects my cash flow, right? That affects my cash flow. That also affects, particularly now with the lot of supply chain disruptions that are going on based on COVID and the war between Russia and Ukraine and all of that. Uh, I may be able to supply things that others may not be able to, right? Again, you can probably charge a little bit of a premium because you are one of the few or the only player that can actually supply that particular product at that time. So that's just an example of understanding how zones work in terms of that whole ecosystem, because again, you have to trust the customs authorities to do their work. You have to trust the developers that develop the zones to do their work, and then the service provider inside the zone to do their work. So the zone regime was designed to be able to facilitate this type of business model. And what you're doing is simply, I don't want to say exploit, but taking advantage or integrating it into your business. So that's a good example of how understanding that ecosystem. In addition to that, the zones need, for example, IT support, right? For various different items or various different matters. They may even need legal services because they have regulatory requirements that they must meet. Understanding that and then providing that service to them, you'll be able to assist. Um, in addition, depending on the regime that you're in, there may be incentives that are put in place to facilitate the linkages between the zone and the domestic territory. So, for example, in Costa Rica, they have, as part of their zone regime, where if a company in the domestic territory, that's the part that's not part of the zone, sells 50% or more of items to a zone, they then enjoy the overall fiscal benefits of the zone. So they get to lower, for example, their corporate income tax rate. That's an example. In Jamaica, I can tell you that there is a zero rating of the value added tax, the GCT, for purchases in the domestic territory. So that incentivizes the zone to seek out a domestic provider of goods and services rather than import the same. And also it incentivizes the provider that's in the domestic territory to sell to, because they know that they can lower their rate, or the rate will be lower because there's no VAT on it, or the VAT is zero rated to enable that. So understanding that will enable you to that's an example of two regimes, but understanding the regime and how the ecosystem all fits together in trusting relationships will give you an advantage. So if you like this episode, please like, share, subscribe. If you want to see me do a particular episode on a subject of interest, just leave me a comment down below and I'll get right back to you.